Going to do a demo on a Yoshi hand. I start with two equally sized marbles. They're made with Crippy from Glass Alchemy, which is one of my favorites. Right now I'm using the parallel masher. This masher is pretty expensive, but it's really nice because I can set it to a certain width, and then that way when I make the second hand, I'll be able to make sure that it's the same size, thickness as the first one. One important step when you're heating huge solid sections like this is to heat it multiple times. So I'll go into the flame for a while, I'll heat it, I'll pull it back out, let it cool down, go back to the flame, and I'll do that multiple times, and what that does is it'll help the heat soak all the way through to the middle without it getting too floppy on the outside. And it also, if you saw there, I just waited a few seconds, squished it with the masher, and now I've got a nice little, almost like a lollipop. And I'm polishing out the tool marks from the masher right now before I start cutting it with my shears to start the fingers. Now when I cut the fingers, the first step I'm doing on this one is I'm cutting out like a V shape where the thumb will meet the index finger. I cut it almost all the way except a little tiny bit was still stuck on there, so I just tap that off into the tink dish. Just using the masher to straighten it back out. The shears kind of twisted it a little bit. Now I'm going back in and I'm reheating to cut out the fingers. This Yoshi's gonna have 3 fingers and a thumb, so it ends up being 2 cuts. Again, just using those mashers to straighten it. And it's gonna be a lot of back and forth here, just using my knife, the mashers, just to kind of move those fingers around, get them how I want them set up. And that little knife there is probably one of my favorite tools. It's just a cheap little China knife I picked up for free from was laying in the drawer at the house years ago when I first started, and I've bought other knives and nothing's worked as well as that one for me. Still just working on those fingers. It's kind of tough to see, but basically I just want to make sure that they're the same width, the cuts are the same depth. Also, I want to make sure that, like for example, the index finger isn't smaller than the pinky. That would look a little funny. So there I used my shears just to kind of cut a little deeper because I think one of those fingers was a little shorter than the other one. And again, just a lot of back and forth here, going from using the knife to move the fingers, keeping them apart. They do stick back together, which does happen sometimes. I just go back in with the shears and cut them back apart again. Using a lot of gravity, trying to get them to droop down a little bit. Yoshi kind of has rounded fingertips, so a droop like that works pretty well for getting that cartoony shape. I did already make one hand, so right now I'm just matching up the second one, making sure that they're the same size, especially those fingers. If one of them has way bigger or way smaller fingers, it's going to be very obvious and look funny at the end. See my little space heater sitting down there. That thing has been through hell, but I tell you what, in the wintertime, it keeps me pretty warm. I bust out the propane heater only when it gets into the, teens. Otherwise, 30 and above, that little space heater is all I usually need. Now this is a step I don't always do. It just depends on how things are looking and how proportionate the fingers are from this hand to the first one. I'm actually just using the Crippy rod to add more color, making the fingers a little bigger, and also just kind of adding on to that thumb area, because so far I haven't really done much shaping on the thumb. I've just pretty much worked on the fingers up until this point. Also, putting that dot on there gives those fingers a little bit more weight, so when I try to use that gravity droop effect again, it's going to help them droop a lot easier because they've got a heavier tip than they do in the middle. Sometimes also if they're starting to get close to each other, if you start to spin it faster, it'll actually start to pull them apart, because what will happen is you'll kind of get that centrifugal force and the fingers will basically flail out. Now, if you do it too much, it's hard to go back from that though, so you've got to be careful if you do that technique. That's why typically I'd rather have more control by using my knife, or otherwise, like you saw in this situation, I can just kind of cold seal a 4mm punty on there to give me a bit of a handle, and I can use that to move those fingers around. As you saw there, I curved the finger with that. Always bend up. Now this order here, there was a special request. They wanted to make sure that one of the Yoshi's hands would be able to hold a dabber in it. So what I'm doing right now is I'm using one of my tools that's roughly the shape and diameter of most dabbers. So I'm using that to kind of curl the fingers around it and the thumb. The Elm arbor works really nice here because I can hold the tool and then roll the fingers up against it and it'll curl them around it. Makes for a really nice grab. Sorry about this part here. I tried to keep everything in shot, but sometimes when I hop on the mini torch, you can't really see what I'm doing. Basically, I'm just polishing some spots there. When you're moving it around like this, you can create little stress spots, like almost wrinkles in the glass. So I'm just going back through with my mini torch to polish those out. It's much better to move the hand around when it's colder versus hotter though, because then you make small movements versus large movements. Because again, you know, if you make too big of a movement, sometimes it's hard to come back from that. But if you make small movements, then you have a lot more control on what the final product is. And right now I think I'm just heating up one of those fingers that needs to move a bit, heating it really close to where it meets the hand. Again, sorry about this. The GoPro has a front-facing screen, but it only stays on for so long, and then after that I'm kind of shooting in the dark, hoping that I'm doing everything in frame. Now right now I'm just reheating this. I know yesterday we all kind of talked about Bunsen's. This right here is basically a Bunsen. I'm just using a heavy propane annealing flame, and I use that to reheat my piece throughout the time that I'm working on it. Also, sometimes if I've been working on a piece for a very long time, I'll try to reheat the entire thing in an annealing flame like that before I put it back into the kiln. Otherwise, what will happen is if you have one half of your piece that's gotten cold, the other half that's hot, you stick it into the kiln, it might end up cracking. And there they are. These are the finished hands. There's both of them. They're pretty symmetrical. And now from here, I'll end up attaching 4mm punty rods to the fingers, and I'll be able to attach them to the arms from there. Now, as you guys probably saw in my video yesterday, I did end up breaking this Yoshi, and I tore them all apart yesterday. I will be able to reuse all the arms, the feet, the joint, the head. Really the only thing I have to replace is the body. So that's an important thing to note, is all of the time on these types of sculptures is spent on things like this, making the hands, making the boots. Once it comes to assembling it, that's really the easy part. All the hard work's been done. So if you get into a big sculpture like this and it does crack, don't throw it on the concrete, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to be able to save over 75% of it and cut your work down tremendously. Now, I just want to thank all of you for your support. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to improve the quality of these videos. This is just the first one I've been able to actually narrate. I hope it helps, and hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.